Richard Nixon sent Henry Kissinger. Now, Henry Kissinger was called the best diplomat of his day at the height of his influence. But here was the problem with Henry Kissinger. The peace treaties he worked out lasted a short time. None of them are in effect today. But Henry Kissinger would go negotiate a peace treaty, and the treaty would fall through with. Anyway, Henry Kissinger negotiated the end of the Vietnam War and got a good reputation, so good that the Arabs and Israelis called on him to negotiate peace treaties with them, none of which lasted. Today, Henry Kissinger has been put on a shelf. He's a college professor. The other Republicans after Ford had nothing to do with him. Reagan didn't want him, and none of the Bushes wanted him. And of course, by now he's really old, but Donald Trump doesn't want him either. But he's been put on a shelf. And in my day, when I was young, Henry Kissinger was, he was a foreign birth, so he could not be president. But one person said, hey, let's make a law that would exempt him and make him president anyway. It didn't pass. All right. Other treaties followed the SALT, Strategic Arms Limitation. Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, SALT Treaty, where the United States and Soviet Union and other countries agreed to not spend so much money on defense. The Helsinki Accords, I won't write that down, said that we were all going to keep the boundaries after World War II. Now, during World War II, Germany had to give up a lot of its land to Poland. Hitler said Germany needed more land. When the war was over, Germany had less land. The Germans living in that part of Poland had to leave and go into Germany. But the Helsinki Accord said the boundaries that were set at the end of World War II were going to keep. So when Germany became a united nation again, Germany said, we're not going to try to get back the land that was taken from us. And they haven't done it yet. So the boundaries are settled now. Helsinki. If you know, Helsinki is in Finland. But in the Helsinki agreements, the Soviet Union kept Eastern Europe, and this upset a lot of folk, including a lot of Eastern Europeans. But the Soviet Union had Eastern Europe, nothing could be done about it. In the meantime, a communist took over Chile. A communist was legally elected. They had a fair election in Chile. Salvador Allende, a known communist, won it. The one and only time an out-and-out true communist won a free election. Within 4 years, thanks to help from the United States, Salvador Allende was overthrown and he was killed. Nixon helped to overthrow him. This is in your book, folk. Now, here's what happened. When the people of when the people of Chile got rid of Allende, they got Pinochet, who was brutal. People in this morning's class, they'll talk a little bit more than some of you do, but I had a person today this morning, why are people like Saddam Hussein and Stalin popular, and Castro popular with the people? Folk, here's why. They at least keep law and order. All right, I want to talk a little about these bad dictators. The United States helped topple Saddam Hussein in Iraq. When Saddam Hussein left power, Iraq went into chaos and war that's still going on. War and chaos and turmoil. ISIS got started. Al-Qaeda got started. Oh man. The United States helped topple Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And guess what? Libya is plunged into a civil war that is still going on. Now, the United States again helped topple Salvador Allende. They got a worse man. The United States did not like Batista. They got Castro. We finally turned against the Shah of Iran. We got Ayatollah Khomeini. The point I'm making is you try to get rid of one leader and you oftentimes wind up with someone worse. Very often. Leaders come and leaders go. Some of them are good and some of them are not. All right. Now, here's something else. Nixon supported a white minority government in South Africa. Now, you may know South Africa, right here on the map, had about 10% white and 90% blacks, but the whites were in power, and the whites were determined not to give power to the blacks. This policy was called apartheid. The whites feared that if the blacks got power, they would take the white land from them. Well, in 1990, the blacks finally got power, and now 2019, I've heard the rumors that the blacks are trying to take over and drive the whites out. Nevertheless, the popular thing to do, the whole world was saying, telling South Africa, you've got to end your policy of apartheid. You must end your policy of apartheid. And finally, the South Africans yielded to the pressure of the whole world and ended their policy of apartheid. And again, I can't say they were better off for it. But, all right. Nixon supported the Shah of Iran. This is going to become important later. The Shah of Iran was a brutal dictator. When the Iranian people got rid of him, they got the Ayatollah Khomeini. Now, folk, why is this so important? Well, okay. The United States was trying to look after its own interests, true. But I read a book one time, the United States was spreading its poison of democracy around the world. You notice I called democracy a poison. And spreading a poison of democracy to people who were not ready for it and couldn't handle it. Most of the world's people down through the ages require, in order to be required to rule by just one man, be he a dictator, be he a king, be he an emperor. In order to remain civilized, they have to have this one man rule. Because under democracies, you get deeper and deeper in debt. Number one, the country gets deeper and deeper in debt. And number two, crime tends to get worse and worse and worse and worse and more worse and more worse as people get more and more rights and more people try to take advantage of it. And after a while, some Socrates told us 2,300 years ago, he said, give people too much freedom and they'll after a while demand somebody come along here and bring order. Socrates said, in my day in Athens, Greece, even the animals don't obey their masters unless they want to. A man will call on his horse, and if the horse is not in the mood, the horse won't come to him. He said, the wives do not obey their husbands. Children do not obey their parents. Soldiers do not obey their officers. He said, this is the type of world we're living in. And eventually people get tired of that. You get tired of punk kids knocking over your mailbox, breaking out your windows. And people eventually say, hey, we demand some kind of order. A classic case is in Singapore, which had been occupied by the French. When Singapore got their independence, they set up a democracy. It got so bad in the land of Singapore that if you wanted to go do grocery shopping, you better take 10 men with you and make sure each of them had a gun. Then maybe you could venture out of your house. Into this scenario stepped a dictator named Liu Yan. Liu Yan brought order to Singapore. He was a dictator, but he brought order. Now, an American went to Singapore one time, an American named Michael Fay. This was about 30 years ago, 25 maybe. Michael Fay was accused of spray painting automobiles. Michael Fay was suffering what we call attention deficit disorder. Basically, Michael Fay was a bad kid. Michael Fay was beaten 4 times with a cane administered by a martial arts expert. The sentence originally was 6, but President Clinton called Liu Yan and asked Liu Yan to reduce the sentence, and Liu Yan reduced it from 6 licks to 4. Michael Fay went to the hospital, then left Singapore and has never gone back. The people of Singapore love that. Because today it has been said in the land of Singapore, even the women can go for a stroll at night in a park and feel safe. Why do the people love their dictators? Because their dictators keep them safe. In Singapore, your honest, upright, hard-working men and women had nothing to fear. All right, I'm saying that to say this. The United States, so would continually support these democracies, and they wouldn't work. Particularly, I'm talking in the Far East, where Singapore is located, the Philippines. When the United States gave the Philippines its independence, lawlessness ran rampant until a dictator took over and he brought law and order by being harsh. Today, the Philippines have a really, really harsh dictator, a man who didn't even want Barack Obama to come to his country, but a really harsh dictator. But he's keeping the Filipinos in order, and the Filipino people seem to like him. All right. Now, right about the time I was graduating from high school, in 1967, the Six-Day War occurred. It lasted early in June, June 5th to June 10th inclusive. That's 6 days. 50 years later, they made a movie about it, which I went to see. But anyway, the Six-Day War was where the Arabs fought against Israel. The Arabs provoked the war and regretted it. Israel fought it on 3 fronts. To the north, they fought Syria. To the east, they fought Jordan. To the south, they fought Egypt. And in all 3 cases, they drove the Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian armies off the battlefield. The war was over with before Iran and Iraq had any time to offer any help to the Arab side. Why did Israel win? Well, one reason Israel won was Israel was using weapons made in the United States. The Arabs were using weapons made in the Soviet Union. And the weaponry made in the United States proved to be better. The Egyptian president said, you buy a tank from the United States and it works. You buy a tank from the Soviet Union and it doesn't work. And one brother who was a spy in East Germany can verify it. He said, a typical tank, well, half the tanks in the Soviet army were in the repair shop all the time. They were very difficult to repair, and they stayed in the repair shop for months. Now, if it took you 6 months to get your car fixed, folk, every time it broke down, but no, we can do better than that. Most cars can be fixed within a matter of while you wait. But sometimes you have to leave it overnight. But again, the Soviet tanks were very, very poorly built. Now, I don't know how that applies to 2019, but Soviet-made equipment was inferior to what the West made. All right. Anyway, the Six-Day War was a big victory for Israel. But in 1973, the Arabs on Yom Kippur, which is a holy day for Israel, they surprised it by invading. Egypt and Jordan and Syria all invaded at once. And this war lasted 3 weeks. Eventually, the Israelis started winning. I mean, well, the Israelis were caught with surprise, but eventually started winning. When it did, the Arabs came to the negotiating table and negotiated a peace. From that day till this, the Arabs have not fought the Israelis. Oh, there was an encounter one time. 90-some Syrian planes decided to play havoc with the Israelis. The Israelis knocked all 90 planes out of the air without losing a plane. The reporters told us time is on the Arab side. Well, actually, time has proven to be on the Israeli side. Today, the Arabs will not fight the Israelis openly. Why not? It is strongly believed, even though Israel has denied it, Israel will not admit it, it's strongly believed that Israel has nuclear weapons. The Arabs have not been allowed to build. Now, Iran is trying to. But it's strongly believed that Israel has nuclear weapons. Also, Israel has better weapons. Israel has the microchip, the microprocessor. About the time I was getting out, I was in a tank unit in the Guard, and they developed tanks that had a gun on them, where a robot did the aiming. In other words, you'd program the tank gun to zero in a target. And the tank could be going at 30 miles an hour over rough terrain, and no human could hit the target bouncing on that fast, but the robot could find a target, aim and hit it, while the tank that robot was in was bouncing around in rough terrain. Again, something that would be humanly impossible, humanly highly unlikely. But the Israelis found a way to do it. Better weaponry, and the Arabs have also, it's known that all of Syria's tanks are utterly useless, but they'd be gone within 2 minutes of a fight with a country like Israel. Now, another reason why Israel has not had to fight since 1973, the Arab world has started fighting among themselves. Today, Syria is fighting Syria. Arabia is fighting Yemen. Libya is fighting Libya. Tunisia is fighting Tunisia. While the Arab world fights among themselves, Israel gets off scot-free. Anyway, the Arabia-Yemen war just recently made news. President Trump tried to get some money to help the side of Arabia because President Trump likes Arabia and Congress wouldn't give it to him. You may know that the Arabian prince killed an American citizen reporter, and Donald Trump has done absolutely nothing about it. So at least one of you seems to be aware of that. Nothing, because Trump wants us to be friends with Arabia. Well, be that as it may. Folks, again, it may seem like I'm knocking him. There's not one of us know what we do in his situation. He, Donald Trump, knows more than we do. All these leaders know more than we do. And I mean, when I was a youngster, I'd dream of being president, and I knew just what I knew how to end a war in Vietnam. Then I got to be a teacher, and I got to be an athletic coach, and I found myself lousing up more than once, and realized that, hey, I'm glad I'm not in that position. Those jobs are practically undoable. If you think you could solve the world's problems, you're not ready to take them on. You can't. All right. Nixon began withdrawing troops from Vietnam. One of his first acts, he said, I'm going to withdraw 1,000 troops from Vietnam. The troops he withdrew were ones who had about a week or two left on a year tour of duty, but he didn't replace them. So it actually was a real troops who believed they had 2 weeks left, were suddenly called into the office by the sergeant. The President of the United States has ordered that you be sent home. They went home. And they were not replaced. We began to scale back. Nixon, though, increased the bombing and dropped more bombs than anybody else in history, trying to force the North Vietnamese to give in. Nixon sent American troops into Cambodia secretly, but the press found out about it. And Congress then refused to fund the troops in Cambodia, so Nixon had to withdraw. Now, in the meantime, folks, this happened in 1970. I was a junior in college. And in May 1970, just before final exam time, students at Kent State University in Ohio were rioting, and somehow, nobody knows who ordered it, but somehow four students were killed by National Guard troops. Here's the sad part. So the National Guardsmen had bricks being thrown at them, and rocks and bottles and tin cans being thrown at them. But the 4 students they shot dead were not even involved in the rioting. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But when they examined, what were these students doing, they were on their way to between one class and another. They knew about the rioting, but they thought, oh no, they won't shoot up. We're not involved. And they thought that the Guardsmen would not shoot. But 4 students rioted, and I'm in Ohio myself. All Ohio colleges were closed. The professors were told, you give your final exams some other time, and every Ohio student in college was ordered to go home. They all went home early. I know this because I went to Ohio shortly after to try to get a job and found that the jobs had already been taken by other students who had gotten there before I did. I eventually found me a job, but that was 1970. I was asked, well, are you a member of the SDS? I said, we don't have that organization on my campus, and I don't want to have anything to do with it. But I assured them that I was not a rebel or rioter. But anyway, this happened at Kent State in 1970. But things began to calm down after that. The war ended. Soldiers began rebelling, fragging, that is, soldiers shooting at their officers, became common. Discipline completely broke down. And again, drugs became a real problem among American soldiers fighting in Vietnam. And my sergeants could tell you when I was in the Army, they'd wake up in the morning and found that the man they'd put on guard duty would have his throat cut from ear to ear. In the meantime, he'd been so high on drugs he had not even been hardly known where he was. But he'd be doing guard duty and all of a sudden be hit at and drop dead without making a sound, and be found the next day. Finally, an agreement was reached in Vietnam. As soon as the agreement was reached and the United States decided the war is over, North Vietnam began shooting at South Vietnamese and killing South Vietnamese again. Nixon was powerless because of the Watergate scandal. All right. The draft was abolished. And we went to a volunteer army, all volunteer. In April 1975, Vietnam fell and the United States has lost its first war. All right. Now, there have been many a book written about President Nixon. Nixon has been analyzed and psychoanalyzed and whatever. But hopefully all of you know, Nixon has been the only president to resign. Now, the story goes somewhat like this. There was a young black man who couldn't get a job. He finally found a job as a security guard. And he was assigned to the Watergate Hotel. Now, if you know about security guards, they never keep the same route. And nobody's supposed to know where they're going. They go from one place to another. Well, this security guard went to the Democratic headquarters, which was located inside of Watergate at that time. And he noticed some tape on the lock. Now, the tape was, so that the door could be opened from inside and out. So somebody pretended, he thought, the cleaning people, they're doing it, all they should do it. So this security guard pulled the tape off the lock. Came back a couple hours later, and there was tape on the lock again. He knew, now, wait a minute, I pulled that tape off. Whoever put that tape back on has to be inside. So he called the police, which was what he was supposed to do. Well, the police were so busy that night that they had to send 2 plainclothes detectives in an unmarked car. Now, there were lookouts. All right, what was going on inside the Watergate Hotel that night? Some men working for CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, were planting wiretaps and microphones, listening devices, tape recorders, all this stuff to try to catch McGovern, know what McGovern was planning. This act is illegal. Anyway, there were policemen, there were lookouts looking for cops. The lookouts had not seen any cops because these men were plainclothes detectives. The plainclothes detectives came to the door of the McGovern headquarters, the Democratic headquarters. They saw the tape. So they shoved the door open, had service revolvers pulled out, and they're wearing their sort of under their coats like plainclothes detectives do. And they said, come out from behind there with your hands up. They could hear some activity going on behind the desk. They expected 2 hands to come up and some masked burglar to come behind the hands. No, 10 hands came up. And the bodies that followed the hands were wearing suits and ties. It turned out these men were engaged in splicing wires, attaching wiretaps, tape recorder, listening devices, whatever. Well, the detectives carried them into the headquarters. One of the detectives was supposed to attend a birthday party for his little girl that day. He didn't get to go home. They kept him there all that day. I mean, he was a night shift. He was supposed to go home at 7 o'clock in the morning. They kept him there all that day and all the following night, and finally at 7 o'clock the following they let him go home. As far as his birthday party for his little girl, he missed that part of the business. Because everybody knew right away, this is big, this is important. Now the first thing you think of is, who would plant wiretaps in a Democratic headquarters? Well, hey, who? Richard Nixon, especially when the 5 men who were caught were working for CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President. Nixon had a way of, coming up with weird names sometimes. This made national news. Now, here is what I believe happened, folk. It has never been proven from that day till this that